This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it is time for Avoid the Maze. You know, Avoid the Maze is about that journey through life. And I don't care what age you are, you wake up in the morning and you really know what you're going to do that day, except maybe it doesn't fall exactly the way you thought. Or when you were younger, you had this great plan in your life. In fact, I remember my oldest son, when he was about 10 years old, he loved American history, and he said, I'm going to be president of the United States one day. And I said, wow, okay. And he went through high school saying the same thing, started college saying the same thing, worked as an attorney. And one day he called me up and he said, I don't want to be president of the United States. I have enough problems of my own. And I just thought about it because he had spent 20 plus years talking about that, almost planning for it, and also preparing me what it would be like, to be the mother of the president. I don't think I would want to do that either. So in our journey, we invite different guests on it. Today, my guest is Laura Hartley. And Laura, I love that you say that you are a life and leadership coach helping change makers. So give me your definition. What is a change maker? Because I think I'm a change maker, but it may not be in your category.
I really see a change maker as anybody who is working to make the world a more just and a more regenerative and a more beautiful place. So Joanna Macy has this definition of an activist, and she says, or she defines it as anybody who is active for a purpose bigger than personal gain. And so I use a very similar definition. Whatever way you're working to make the world a little bit more beautiful, I consider you a change maker.
So I think most of us are, even though we may not realize it as we're going through our daily tasks. And there are others who really do believe they are change makers, and I'm not really sure they're going about it the right way. But again, we're not going to judge on that because we each have our own abilities and reasons for doing what we do. But what made you decide to get into this field? Because, about, I'd say 30 years ago, if somebody said they were going to a coach, they thought they were going to a baseball coach, a football coach, a basketball coach, a tennis coach. But they didn't think of people like yourself and myself that are there helping people get through the maze and try to figure out what is it you want to do next and how do you want to do it. So what brought you to this point?
I mean, the world has changed, right? Especially coaching over the last 20, 30 years. Really there's two distinct aspects to my work. There's my background and my love of personal development. I was very fortunate, I was actually exposed to coaching from quite young. My mother was a coach, and so it was something that I grew up around, and that was gave me a real love for good questions and the power that good questions can hold to shift our perspective, to help us see things in a different way. And so I always knew that at least working in the inner dimension of our worlds, in this personal development realm, was something that was important to me. But as I dived into the field, I also discovered that there were some limitations within it. There was sometimes such an emphasis on looking within that we also didn't look without, right? We didn't look at the climate crisis. We didn't look at ongoing racial injustice. We didn't look at war or poverty. And sometimes there was this element of like, well, if you just work on yourself, that's all that matters. And that was always in conflict or in tension with me, okay? Because we live in this really pivotal point in the world where we have so many crises that are surrounding us. And so as a climate activist as well, I developed this outward lens that started to look at systems and stories and policies and the real differences that need to change in the world. But sometimes being an activist also missed this inner world too. It missed the fact that we need to change hearts as much as minds, and that, sometimes we're trying to make change using the same energy that the system is asking of us, or the same energy that we're trying to disrupt. So my work was born out of these two spaces as both personal development and outer work as an activist, and bringing me to the work that I do today, helping change makers and climate leaders.
Well, I love the fact that you're talking about that we have to look outside ourselves, because so many times we think it's this deep, dark rooted thing inside of us that we have to pull out, look at, and just change it. And what I try to realize, at least for myself and for my clients, is it may not be that deep rooted in me. It may be deep rooted around me. And I have to understand that, like you were saying, I have to understand what is going on with climate change. Is that really affecting me? And what do I want to do about it? You know, is it my deep feeling, or is it this feeling that's around me that says, hey, you're not going to get any further unless you weed through this and understand the situation. And so I find that I'm constantly out there learning and trying to understand more and more things. And some of my clients will say, but you're confusing me. Why do I have to look at all of it? Well, before you can make a change, you have to be able to be aware of what it is that you want to change and how it's going to fulfill, your success. And success is spelled differently by all of us. So you said your mother was a coach, so that means she got a very early start. You got to see what that was all about. Did you ever think that maybe you would do something else with your life?
Oh, I mean, sure. Like, I think we all have those in another life careers as well. Those things that maybe, things have been a little bit different that we would have pursued. So, but for me, I always knew that it was the direction that I wanted to be heading, or at least one of the options that I wanted to pursue. And, I've been coaching now for a number of years, and it's something that I'm still very passionate about. And that is an increasingly expanding field, right? That actually gives us more and more space to work with. And more different dimensions to help people and to support people on their journeys.
So if a client comes to you and says, Laura, I just can't keep going on this way, what does that really mean? What does it mean you can't keep going on this way? How do you help them dig deep so that they know what it is that they want to do? Because so many people come to a coach expecting the coach to tell them what direction they should go in. And that's not what we do.
Yeah, well, I think I mentioned at the beginning, one of the reasons I love coaching is that it's really about good questions, right? You're exactly right. Coaching is not about giving answers. It's not about giving solutions. It's about, giving the right question and the right container to help you explore things from a different perspective. And so a lot of the people that I work with are feeling burnt out, feeling exhausted, feeling stressed, and wondering, well, how am I supposed to keep doing this work that is often really important work that they really care about, that's really good for the world, but that just isn't really sustainable in the way that they're working. So what we start to look at is, well, is it the work itself and where you are, or is it the way in which you're working? Right? Is it the values that are underpinning your work? Is it the ideas that say, I've never done enough, that I always need to be doing more? Do we know where that kind of satiability lies? And so these are all the dimensions that we start to unpack.
So I totally agree, because when I decided to move into the realm of blogging, podcasting, and coaching, I knew I loved what I was doing in corporate America, but I didn't like the culture. And the culture was what was killing me. And it took me a while to figure it out, because people would say to me on a daily basis, Karen, you're looking a little burned out. But I loved working with my students. I loved helping them, see the path that they were going in. I loved when a student would come in and say, you know what, this is no longer for me. And I knew they were right, but I got them also to ask the questions, if this isn't for me, what is? But my upper management would say, so-and-so dropped out. And I'd go, yeah, they did. And I have a big smile on my face, because they were getting what they wanted. And management was saying to me, no, can't do it that way. And so when I realized it was the culture, I said, I need to move away. But at the same time, I thought, now what? How do I do this by myself, without that corporate label? So do you find that some of your clients come to you the same way, that they're so burned out, but they still love what they're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of my clients aren't necessarily in the corporate sphere, but certainly you have the
Sure.
same experience of burnout in activism, in nonprofit, a lot of the time in social enterprises. And I think this is because, burnout isn't just an individual problem. We often frame it as such. We kind of say, well, like, it's you, just it's this resiliency deficit. If you meditate a little bit more, if you pick up a gratitude journal or get outside on the weekend, you'll be fine. And that's completely untrue. It's a result of the way in which we're working. And it's a result of the values that kind of shape the landscape that we're a part of. And so unpacking ourselves from those values is sometimes tricky work, because sometimes it's going against the grain of culture, is going against the grain of what was expected of us, is going against the grain of what our workplace has, always operated as.
Right.
And yet, if we don't do that, the outcome is ultimately that we continue down that path of burnout. We continue down that path of exhaustion. And that doesn't help us, and it doesn't help the world either.
It's interesting because when I started the business, I felt like I had to prove something, but I was proving it to me, but I thought I was proving it to the world. Okay. How hard I work, the people that I talk to, being able to say I have X amount of hits and whatever it took. And I didn't realize I hit burnout. And I sat down one day and I thought, okay, if I give this all up, then what? And the answer was no, it wasn't giving it up. It was looking at how I was doing it and finding a way to do it where I was still going to be happy and feel like I was giving something to the world. And my youngest son, who actually owns New Cleveland Radio, but of course doesn't work here at all, he just happens to own it. One day he said to me, "You're doing something different." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he goes, "You just are happier." And I realized what it was. I didn't have to do 10 podcasts a day. I didn't have to write an article a day. I didn't have to do all these things if my heart wasn't in it. And so when I started putting my heart into it and talking about the things that are most important to me, the burnout went away. And I can sense when it's coming back, and I can sit back and say, okay, what's producing it? So there are those hard questions. And sometimes it's difficult for us to ask them because we don't want to hear the answer, because sometimes the answer might mean walk away, do something else.
Sometimes it does, and that is the challenging thing. I think, certainly it doesn't always mean that, and I will make that disclaimer, but sometimes it really means we need to go in a direction that sometimes feels good. I often use this analogy, right? We're following this inner compass and it feels exciting and it feels kind of, yeah, that feels good, but it also is deeply uncomfortable. And again, it's that uncomfortability that we need to unpack, because it's that is coming from the stories that say, but I should be doing this, or I must be doing this, or the best way to make change is to do this, or this is what I'm supposed to do. And so many of those stories are out of alignment with what is true for us. They're out of alignment with our well-being. They're out of alignment with our sense of thriving, and they're out of alignment with the well-being of the world as well.
So one of the things I hear you saying is that when we want to make change, we need to make sure that the change is for us. It's not necessarily for people around us, because I know that when I was in college many moons ago, my parents only wanted me to get a teaching degree. And I went against the grain and I went for a communications degree, and they were not happy with me because back in the early 70s, there were very few women in communications. And so they thought, we've wasted our money. And so automatically I changed. I didn't get my teaching degree, but I took jobs that I thought my parents would approve of. I'm going to work in an office. I'm going to be a great administrative assistant. I'm going to do these female things. But I wasn't happy. And I wasn't very good at those jobs. And it wasn't until I woke up one morning and I said, well, who am I pleasing? I have to live with me. And I wanted things differently than a lot of my friends did. So listening to my parents wasn't the answer. Listening to my friends wasn't. But I really didn't know how to listen to myself. So how do you help your clients understand what it is that they want, not what their spouse, their parents, their children, their neighbors want from them?
Hmm. I think the first step with any of this work is also really about reconnecting to the body. I think for so much of the time, our body is this source of information, it is this source of wisdom. But, as a culture, we live very neck up, kind of just in this space of the head. And when we, especially if we have burnt out before, or we have a pattern of kind of ending up on that burnout spectrum or that burnout cycle, we're often very disconnected from our body because we don't reach that place without there have been a lot of signs and signals in our shoulders and our neck and the tension and the headaches. And, stress is this really physical experience that we tend to tap out from. So whether it is moving out of burnout or whether it's figuring out our next direction and our next step and navigating these transitions, like returning to our body and noticing what is happening, like being aware of my shoulders, my belly, is it light, is it heavy, is it expansive, is this real compass point that we begin to use. And we also use the tools of self-inquiry, that start to really look at unpacking the stories that we carry within us. What is the story that says, this is the way life is and why? What does that look like? And if you look for shoulds, those are always through lines to cultural stories. And then we can start to have a little bit of a play with that, right? Okay, is this serving us? Is this not? Who benefits from this story? Who doesn't? And then we can start to make better decisions from that place.
So another example I have, when I was a very little girl, probably maybe 9 or 10 years old, we were sitting on our front porch on a summer evening, and I looked down the street and I said to my mother, someday, Mom, I'm going to get married. I'm going to live in that house, and I'm going to have 4 kids. And on Friday nights, we're going to come to your house for dinner. And on Sunday morning, you're going to come to our house for brunch. And she looked at me and she said, oh, honey, that sounds like a beautiful life. And for a long time, I thought that's what we were going to do until we moved out of the neighborhood and our house wasn't there and that other house wasn't there. And I was in my teens and I wasn't so sure I wanted to have 4 kids. And I wasn't so sure I wanted to spend 2 days a week with my parents, because of course I was a teen and at that time. And it took me a long time to understand that you can have those dreams, you can have those thoughts, but you evolve from them. You keep finding the right space in your life. And for a long time, the right space in my life was corporate America because, number one, it paid the bills. It gave me a title that made me feel good. But most of all, I loved what I did. And again, until I realized what was causing my headaches, the pain in my shoulder, my feeling that I was sick every day and couldn't eat, I realized that was the culture. And I just didn't belong there. And it took me about 12 months to get out the door because I was blaming myself. Is that a familiar thing that let's do?
Absolutely. But I think, we do this on such a cultural level, right? We take big cultural systemic problems and we put them onto individual shoulders. We do it with climate change. You see narratives that talk about light bulbs or recycling habits more than the entire economic system that we live within. We do it with, so controversially, I live in Canada and I know obviously you're in the US. In North America, with tipping culture. The idea is, again, the minimum wage is actually not sustainable. That's a system problem that needs to be fixed. But individuals are expected to fix that with each transaction. And so this is a very common experience that we have of taking big system problems and bringing it down to the level of the individual. And we do a similar thing with burnout. We say, well, it's not the values of our working culture. It's not the values of capitalism, it's you. And if you just do these steps, you'll be okay. And this is why you can even see like this rise in, corporate well-being programs or the mindfulness session at, the lunch and learn. But these sessions are not actually designed for our well-being. They're designed around productivity. How can you keep doing the exact same thing that you're doing and just not feel quite so exhausted? And that's not how this works. Okay, we need to change the way in which we're working. We need to change the values of the culture that we're in. We need to hand back that story off the individual shoulders and back to the collective where it belongs.
So have you noticed that since the pandemic, that people now are doing better? They're doing what is best for them, and therefore maybe it's making the world a little bit better place?
As a collective and as a whole, no. No, absolutely, yes. So it's some individuals, absolutely. It was a real turning point for some people. And, because it was this real shift, right? That gave people space to reevaluate, well, what is it that actually matters to me? Am I enjoying this? Or this is a whole nother way of working. Maybe this is better for me. But for the whole, no. Many people are still burnt out. There was a study in the UK, it's only in the last few months, I think, that showed like 91% of the respondents felt like higher extreme levels of stress in their jobs. Okay. 1 in 4 felt unable to cope. There's huge amounts of burnout that we're experiencing across the board, but it's also becoming normalized. And that is part of the challenge, that it's seen as, well, this is just what life is. This is what adulting is. This is what being a leader is. And that's not true. This is a glorification of stress that its main aim is to just keep the system working as it is, rather than disrupting the system as a whole.
I wrote something the other day, and a friend of mine said, so you really hated working out of the house most of your life? And I said, I did. I loved what I did, but I hated going into the workplace because I never felt appreciated. And I wasn't appreciating myself. So I'd walk in, and as soon as I walked in the door, I had a headache. As soon as we were supposed to start working, I made sure I was working 5 minutes sooner and skipping my lunches and working later to prove that I fit the mold. I did this for over 20 years. And my husband is totally the opposite of me. It's like, I'll go and I'll do my job. But you know what? If I can't do what I'm supposed to today, well, I'll try to do it better tomorrow. And he wouldn't come home with a headache, and he didn't come home angry. And so when I finally left and started working from home, and then finally found this, hey, I don't have to do so much, I said, wow, I wish I had learned this all those years, because I suffered, but I made myself suffer. And I realize that now.
Yeah, we do, but also because that is what the systems around us expect, right? And so this is also that element of like blame that we tend to do, that again, it was my fault. And yes, we have agency, right? We have power, we have choices. And this is really important to remember in how we participate in the world. But the structures of our world, and particularly the structures of, the workforce and capitalism that exists as it does across, Europe, North America, Australia, isn't actually designed for well-being. It isn't designed to promote human well-being or planetary well-being or flourishing in any sense. It is designed for growth, and it's designed for extraction, and it is designed for profit. And so we have to be also recognize that the first stage, I think, of any work in healing burnout is absolutely the individual work, right? It's restoring ourselves to a place where actually we have something to offer, where we feel replenished, where we feel good because we deserve that, we should. But then it's also challenging the culture in which we are, right? Challenging the microcultures that we're a part of, the culture of our organizations, of our teams, of our families, of our communities, to say, what is it that really matters to us? And is this way of working, and is this environment actually reflective of our well-being?
And most companies are going to say no because they either don't know how to change it, or they just want to stay on the same path they've always been on because that's all they know. I know my son is in sports and he works for a team down in Texas. And one of the things that is so wonderful about it is that they try to understand each of the individual employees, and to the point that sometimes I look at him and go, really? Like, how can they do that? He had emergency surgery last spring, and he called 2 days after the surgery and he said, they told me I'm going to be out for about 2 weeks, but I'll start working from home. And they said, oh, no, you won't. And he goes, no, I can do that. And no, you need to take the time. And you have the time. And they actually ended up giving him close to 6 weeks because he needed it. And when he came back, they didn't ask for anything extra. They just asked him, stay on path. And they notice if he's burning out or tired. And he notices his employees too. And I said to him, it's got to be a remarkable place to work. And he said, it is. He doesn't go home frustrated. He's happy to do what he's got to do, but they're one in a million. We know that in all companies, but they're proving they can do this. So how do we get the bigger system to see that we can provide for each other and we don't have to take things away?
Yeah, so I think two things. One, I just want to acknowledge that companies, I understand and this is only certain spaces because there's a lot of amazing companies out there as well that are very tied to the status quo and that don't actually prioritize the deeper values upon which they rest, will become companies of the past that won't be able to keep up with the world as it is changing. But two, for those of us who are looking to make this change, I think it's really about working in the microculture of the team, right? There's so often when we think about changing the huge picture, right? The whole company or the whole of capitalism or the whole of corporate America, whatever it might be, it's like, that feels overwhelming. I'm one person. Who am I to do that? I can't do that. Okay, we're not trying to work there, but what we are working with is the real microcultures that we're a part of. Okay, who do we work with on a day-to-day basis? Are we having real conversations with them about what matters, about what we care about where our capacity is at, where our energy is at, what else is going on in our lives? I'm not suggesting that we need to tell people everything, but being able to show up as like a full human being to the spaces that we work. Okay, so many of us are navigating illness or grief or loss or stress in other dimensions of our lives, and we just expect our output to always be on, always at the same level. Monday 9 a.m. to Friday at 5 p.m., it's all out. And so starting these conversations there with the people around us, with the people with whom we can start to really make a difference, even if it's a kind of subvertive thing, just like, hey, okay, let's trial this amongst ourselves. Let's see what we can make work, see how we can support each other, and see what you can ripple out from there.
Well, we have a long way to go, but it starts with conversation, and you're absolutely right. And it starts with us knowing what we really can and can't do. Like I said, for many years, I went to work thinking, this is all I can do. And when I went out on my own, I realized, wow, look at all that I can do. And each day it seems to get bigger and bigger. And yet there are some people out there saying, yeah, but Karen, at your age, you don't have to be doing it. Well, you know what? I'm loving it. I'm learning. I'm staying active. And maybe I'm helping one other person live a much better life. So Laura, where can our listeners find you and connect with you and learn more about you?
My website is laurahartley.com. My Instagram, I'm quite active on there, is at laura.h.hartley. And I'm also on LinkedIn if that is your space.
So we'll make sure that's all in the show notes. Thank you for all the great work that you're doing. I'm sure you're making a dent, and that's what we all have to do. If we make that little dent it's going to grow bigger and bigger. So I
And
think
thank
it's
you for
gonna be-
having me on. It was a pleasure and a joy to have this conversation.
Thank you, Laura. Have a great day now. Bye-bye.